here at NYICFF, we really love to give voice to our audience and have these exciting and fulfilling opportunities to have dialogues with the filmmakers. So we really want to encourage you all to ask questions. We're going to give you a moment to think about any of you audience members, questions that you have for the director. And so if you want to think about that, and go ahead and line up on either side of the aisle. Now that we have Jakob here. So as you get ready to formulate those great questions that I know you have, I'm just going to start off the dialogue with Jakob and ask what the process was like for you stepping into this adaptation of Roald Dahl's very renowned stories and templates, illustrations, and helps you how to translate to that back to the screen.
All right. Is this on? Yeah. I think the process is really kick-started with the book that this is based on. So this is based on a Roald Dahl book which has 6 distinct stories, and once I've been given that book, the main thing you think about is how do you make that into one story? How do you combine all these stories? And I think this was a few months of just thinking about how do you connect Jet with Cindy, and how do you connect Snow White with Little Red Riding Hood, and what do they all have in common, and what are their goals? And that's the start of the process, and probably the toughest bit actually. And then once you have that figured out, and it's just a lot of work really, just making all pictures. Yeah.
And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about making that into pictures, the way that you played with depth in this feature, and looking at those wonderful sort of backgrounds and how that all came about and was envisioned.
Yeah, it's a funny story. I directed this with a dear friend. So there were 2 directors, and the first time we met to talk about the story, actually, not how it would look, was in a cafe in Munich, which is a town in Bavaria that we're both from. And we were sitting in front of a museum, which is the Puppet Museum. So there were lots of puppets on display, and we went in there and saw these little stages that had like puppet stages, marionette stages. And we looked at that while we were talking about the story, and we said, this is a really, really interesting look, like these puppety characters with these very stagey, flat backgrounds. And so for the main story, for the fairy tales, we decided we'd aim for that look. Well, for the frame stories, so the wolf in the cafe with the babysitter, and later in the Little Red Riding Hood house, we went for something slightly more lush, fur, and more detailed, just to be able to separate these 2 worlds a bit. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Wow, there's a lot of kids here.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks so much for coming. This is really nice for me as well. Just to say.
Fantastic. All right, let's get some young questions over here. I'm going to start on the right and alternate between right and left. Do you want to go ahead?
Did you enjoy working on this movie?
I enjoyed it a lot, I have to say. This was probably the movie I enjoyed working on the most, which is weird because it was also the movie I worked on the longest. So this was a 3-year process, and normally things if you do something for a very long time, sometimes it gets a bit boring. And this somehow didn't, because there were so many characters and so much stuff to think about. So I really enjoyed it. It was quite exciting. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is based off the book. What inspired you to say, oh, this is a book, let's make this into a movie?
All right, I'll give you a very honest answer. My job in this is the director, so I read books a lot. I read children's books a lot, weirdly, but in the end, someone with money comes to me and says, "This is a book. Read this. Would you like to do this?" Now, I've been a great fan of Roald Dahl, so I was hoping for a long time that someone would maybe bring that, like, a Roald Dahl book to me. And then, about 2013, that happened. Someone sent that book to me and said, "Would you like to do that?" And I said, "Yes, very much. I would like to do that." So that's how that happened.
Alrighty, you're up.
What's your favorite book by Roald Dahl?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. What's your favorite book by Roald Dahl?
Willy Wonka.
Willy Wonka, all right, Chocolate Factory, that's a great book. I gotta say, Matilda is probably the one that's closest to my heart. Now it's rivaled by this one, because I spent 3 years thinking about Revolting Rhymes, and I've come to love it quite a bit. But Matilda's just, yeah, probably my favorite.
Okay.
So you actually asked that question originally, but like what started your directing career?
That's a great question. So I studied animation, which is not directing. Animation is actually making the characters move. So that's what I learned. And then from being an animator, so sitting at a desk doing all the drawings, becoming a director is a slightly weird jump. Someone at some point asks you, would you like to co-direct this? Would you like to help with the directing? And then you take little steps. So you have your first, you dip your toes in the water and say, oh, I'll try it a bit. And then film by film, your responsibilities grow a bit. But it's, you kind of, you learn the craft, you learn all the tricks, but then someone has to put a lot of trust in you at some point. And yeah, I was lucky in that regard, I guess.
Okay, the young lady in the striped skirt.
What are the kids' names?
All right. I don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know. So I literally don't know what they're called boy and girl for us. So you can make up your own names for them. That's what happened during production. People had different names for them, and I just settled for the boy and the girl.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent thing to email us at the festival. What are the kids' names? All right, over here.
Why did the wolf not eat the children?
That's the best question yet. So why did he not eat the children? Because he did go in there to eat them, right? That's my impression. And then he got to know them, and he had a reason why he wanted to eat them, right? Because their mother, yeah, did something to his nephews. But he got to know them, and he got to tell them a story, and he got to shape the story based on what they wanted to hear, what they needed to hear in that moment, and he just got to like them. And that somehow got more important than his original plan. So he changed his plans, which is something we sometimes have to do. It's really important to have that ability. So he basically forgave the Red Riding Hood, I think. We have to ask him, but I think that's what happened. He chose to forgive the Red Riding Hood and not eat her children. All right.
Yes.
Was the first sketch of the characters, was it very different from the one that we saw?
The first sketch, you mean the first drawing? Yes, it was. It was really different, that's true. So the book has illustrations, and most of Roald Dahl's story are illustrated by a great illustrator called Quentin Blake. Exactly, Quentin Blake, you know him. And that's quite daunting. If you take on a film, and I draw, like that's what I do, and so you get books with those kind of illustrations, it's a bit scary, because Quentin's work is, I love it so much. So I had to find out how much to relate to the original drawings and how much to differ from it. And yes, in the beginning I was a lot closer to Quentin's drawings, and I found out that it didn't really work. I didn't do them justice by sticking to them too closely. So there was a lot of people trying out how the characters would look, but they looked very different in the beginning. They did, yeah.
Okay, we have a full evening ahead of us. We have one last question.
What was the biggest challenge during filming?
There were two big challenges on this one that I didn't anticipate. One was, so the first job you get as a director is to write it, right? You get the book, but the book is different from the film. The book is 6 stories, they're all separate. So the first thing you have to do is you have to write what they call an adaptation, which is like the film version of the story. And that was surprisingly difficult on this one, because there's so much you have to connect, the frame story, the main story, the characters. And when taking on the writing job, I didn't anticipate that I would spend so long writing it, because it was already, there was a book which was good. So why did it take me so long to make this out of it? I don't know, that was difficult. The second thing, because it took me so long to write it, was to finish it in time. because I started very late actually making the film with a big team of 200 people churning away. So those were the two challenges, writing it and then finishing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this event with us. Thank you so much, Jacob. It's an extraordinary film.
I'm super happy that you came. Thanks so much.
And we look forward to seeing you at the month-long festival, which kicks off tonight and goes for 4 more weekends. Thank you all, and have a great night.
Thanks so much.